Hi, welcome to the Throttle Cable. Thanks for finding me. Please like, subscribe and share the channel. I'm going to show you today how I installed a harness bar, roll bar into the back of my 996. Hi, welcome to the Throttle Cable. I'm Rob. Today I'm going to be talking to you about installing a harness bar into the back of the 996. You may refer to it as a harness bar, a safety bar, a roll cage, but essentially this is the type of bar that fastens into the existing factory seatbelt points. So you don't need to trim any carpet, you don't need to make any real adjustment inside the car. There's a little bit of plastic that you have to trim to allow the front legs to go into place, but otherwise it's a completely standard fit part that you can get out of the tech equipment catalogue. There are three different types of cages that go in the 996 and the 997 generations of cars. I've discovered by a conversation on Instagram that they may have been called different things in different markets, but in the UK, the three types we had, two for the 996, the sports bar and the safety bar. The sports bar was just a rollover hoop with no cross bracing within it. Sometimes that was referred to as a Pan America bar in other markets. There is the safety bar, which was the same hoop but with a diagonal and a harness strut across it, so you could run harnesses within the car, hence the safety bar. Then with the advent of the 997, another bar, which was the Pan America bar, and that put a cross brace in the back as well as a harness point. And the decent thing about that was because of the cross bracing, it held the harness straps together, so it was really good for a 6-point harness and running hands equipment. That's the bar I've got. It was only produced for, I believe, less than a year, and once they were sold, they were sold. They never made any more. You can still get hold of the 996 version, but if you want a Pan America, you've got to really search for one. And I was very fortunate to find one coming out of a GT3, which I snapped up. So let me show you all about that installation. Just to share this at the front, so this is the full instruction pack that you can get from Porsche to install the harness bar. And I've really struggled to find this online. Nobody seems to have it, but you can get it from the Porsche dealer. If you need it, just drop me a note in the comments and I'll happily forward it on to you. It's just a PDF document. But it gives you a rundown of everything you need to do, essentially, all of the adjustments you need to make in the car. But quite helpfully, there's a piece of plastic you need to trim, and this gives you where you need to cut it. This piece of plastic here, it's down in the bottom of the B-pillar of the car, and you'll see this kind of circular marking in the plastic, and this piece actually continues along here. This gives you the cut line, so you essentially have to take out this much plastic to get the cage to sit in, because this is where the legs pass down to the lower seatbelt mounting point. If you don't do this, you're just crushing all of this plastic. And having seen how the plastic is made, it's sort of a honeycomb. I would massively suggest you don't try and just crush it into place, because there's lots of cabling and wiring here. The wiring you can see through this kind of cutout when you've got everything open. And that's the shape you need to follow. I just used a dive tool, like a Dremel tool, to go in and cut it, and then went back over it with some sandpaper to just finish off the edges, so it was a nice clean cut. But yeah, it needs to be done on both sides, so I'll show you whereabouts that is in the car as well. But if you need a copy of this, yeah, just drop me a comment and I'll get it across to you. One of the biggest learnings I had on this installation is not to use the supplied tech equipment bolts. I say supplied, I had to source these via the United States because I tried to get them in the UK, and neither of the Porsche dealerships I went to understood what it was I needed and couldn't help me order them. Suncoast in the USA, big shout out to those guys. They're absolutely fantastic, and they shipped them across to me in the space of, I think, a week. Now, the big challenge I had was that these aren't that expensive. I think the entire kit was less than $70. But of course, you're paying tax in the US, you're paying a shipping charge to take it halfway around the world, then you're paying import duties in the UK. All told, this was over £100 just for a set of bolts, which is bloody bonkers, but I couldn't get away from it at the time. What I then discovered after trying to fit that is that these are almost impossible to line up. There's so much tension at the front of the cage, trying to pull the bolt in a direction where the thread simply isn't, because they don't line up perfectly, these cages. You have to sort of manhandle them into place and hold them there while bolts go in. The guys on Rennlist have a little thread running, and it said, yeah, simply use a stud. Really obvious when somebody says this, but if you put the cage into place, you can then thread a stud in without needing to have this spacer in place and all of the seatbelt fastened to this. you can simply get the stud in, and then once the stud's aligned and in its right position, you can then put all of these bits and pieces together. It's a huge help. The bolt is a 7/16 bolt. So I got a 4-inch fully threaded bolt, took off the head and tidied up threads, made myself a stud. All you need to do is double nut the stud so you've got a nice tight fastener on one end, and you can then just, you know, I mean, these went in by hand. I just hand wound them in to the position I needed them, and then started to place everything on top and wind it in. I tried for a whole afternoon trying to get these to go in, and you have to be so careful not to cross thread the seatbelt points. That's why it was taking so damn long. Once I switched over to trying it with studs, it was all aligned up and in within 10 minutes. So Rennlist, the site that kept on giving, the next tip I took from there was to actually clean up all the threads before I did anything. So I've got a tap and a die, and this is a 7/16, 20 threads per inch UNF thread that's on these seatbelt fasteners, and I could use this, one, to clean up the bolts once I cut the heads off my new studs, and two, using the tap to clean out the threads that are in the car. So I knew that I had a perfect thread that I was going to be going into. You may be tempted to miss this step, and equally I was very tempted to miss it out, but yeah, it is very evident that unless you clean these threads up first, you can create a mountain of problems for yourselves. These cost me less than, I think, £15 off of Amazon. They're not the highest quality tap and die, but the fact I was going to be using them, well, twice, one on each side, meant that I didn't need to spend hundreds of pounds on a tap and a die. I could just get away with these, and they are perfectly usable, and did a really good job. Recommended. It might sound obvious, but the first thing to do to put a cage in is to remove both the seats. Now, I've got bucket seats, so this process isn't the same as with the standard seats, but if you want to know how to take them out, have a quick look at my video for the bucket seat installation, and I've got full guides on how to remove the seats. Essentially for me, mine's a doddle. I've just got 2 Allen bolts front and rear of these seats, and they'll be lifting straight out. Once you've got the front seats removed, then you need to remove the rear seats to make way for the harness bar. I've made a completely separate video on doing that, and it's only a 20-minute job. So just follow the link up top, and that'll take you to the video to remove those rear seats. So once you've got your seats out, the next thing to do is start to dismantle I want to call them door cards, but there's no door at the back. The rear cards, you need to take those out. And the reason you need to take those out is because you have to get under the floor here, where this leg comes into the carpet, and trim a bit of plastic. But everything above it is essentially stopping you from getting to it. And you need to take all that out, all the way up the B-pillar. The process is pretty straightforward and easy, if I'm honest. It should take you no more than 20 minutes aside, maybe even less. And there is another video online that shows quite nicely how a cage was installed in another GT3 circa 2004, 2006. I'll put a link in the description. But it got the order slightly wrong. All of the steps are there, but if you get the wrong order of dismantling the car, you risk breaking something and making it a lot more difficult for yourself. So let me quickly show you the order that this needs to go in. So everything above shoulder height on this B-pillar has to come out. The first thing to remove is the coat hook. It's pretty straightforward, and that other video that I mentioned had a great tip of using one of these sticker applicators to remove it. There's 2 clips, one here and one here. And if you get this underneath, you can very easily release those 2 bottom clips. Then there's one last clip in the top center. Once you release those 2, this pops forward and you can lift it up and off. And that's quite nice and easy to pop off. You can feel where those clips are very easily with one of these. Once that's off, you then need to release the seat belt. So this is another one of those 7/16 bolts. The bolt head is similar to a 17mm, which will probably help you get it off. But you need the imperial equivalent if you want to do it properly. These are tightened down to 50 Newton meters, so there's quite a lot of torque in there. To get to that bolt, you need to first release this cap, and there's pins 1, 2, 3, 4 that go in and clip in sideways off of this. So if you just simply squeeze this together slightly and pull it with a bit of a tug straight off, that will release and show you where that bolt head is. You can then release the bolt head. Now with that removed, this obviously just drops down to the floor. Well, not to the floor, but it drops where it's disappearing at the bottom of the B-pillar. With that removed and with this removed, there's one final screw that sits under here. You unscrew that, and then this cover can simply lift upwards and out. At the bottom, there are two prongs which stick into the lower card. And that's why if you try and remove the card before this, you can start to cause some damage to those trim. But yeah, once you've got that piece out, you're then on to the lower card removal. Okay, so once you've removed everything off that B-pillar, it's then time to start thinking about getting the card out. And there's a few fasteners that you've got to take care of before you can start to lift it out. The first thing to do is to release the door speaker. Now there's two Torx that are holding that grill and the speaker in place, and that's a T20. If you take those out, it allows you to lift the speaker forward and unplug it. You've got to unplug it to get the wiring out of the way and enable you to remove the card. After that, there is a 6mm hex that you need to remove at the back. That'll be torqued down to 50 Newton meters, so it's tight. Give it a couple of grrs and you'll be able to undo it. And then hidden in here, in that little hole, is a Phillips. You'll be able to see it much easier once the B-pillar trim is removed, but it's there. Don't forget about that, otherwise you'll be trying to rip it out of its thread. So once you've got that Phillips out, you've removed the speaker and you've removed the Allen bolt at the back there, that 6mm, you're ready to then start pulling the trim away. Now behind the trim, you've got a couple of plastic spring clips. There's two on essentially stalks which go into the side of the car, and I think there's 3 round spring clips that sit up the top there which clip that in. Then everything lips underneath the rubber seals, and around the door there, around the rubber seals, much like the B-pillar does, into the rubber seals. And it's just a matter of giving it a bit of a tug and pulling it off. With the speaker removed, you can get your hand behind it and help coax it off. I didn't use any tools, I just used my fingers for this, and be persistent, be a little bit forceful, and it will remove. So once you've removed the cards from the rear of the car, it's then time to remove these door entry trims. First up on the driver's side, where you've got the hood and the boot release, you have what are essentially 3 Allen bolts. So I put an Allen key in here just to show you where they are. They're hidden back under here. There's some 3 plastic caps you've got to remove to get into these Allen bolts. But once you're in there, you'll find a 5mm Allen bolt, which is clamping this together to keep the plastic down, held firm. What you need to do is unwind this 4 turns, no more than 5 turns, because you don't want this to come out of its thread. You just want to release the clamping force that it's got here. So that little hex is actually quite far in. If I pull this out, you can see how far it sits inside when you've got to get down inside that hole. So yeah, release it by 4 or 5 turns. This then pulls straight up, and then you're then able to release the carpet. It's just got a couple of hooks. There's a hook under here and a hook further back, and then you can get down to this plastic trim. The other side, now the passenger side, this is the easy side. You just remove this little bit of rubber out the umbrella holder, and then you've got 2 T20s that you just need to unscrew. You work those off, and then you just pull this literally straight up, and out it comes, and that gives you access to remove the carpet, pull it back, and start doing the trimming work here. What is it you're trimming? So the part you need to trim just sits in behind this bar, because as you can see, the bar compresses right against where the door card joins the lower carpet, and you need this cutout to allow the leg of the bar to come down and through. So this part here, it literally, you'll see the cutout for the electronic box. This just covers over there, and it shows you by the template exactly where you need to cut. The other side is the mirror image reverse of this. So what I did was actually cut the template out, so I just had the piece, and I could flip it over to use it on the passenger side as well, and make the appropriate trim, which allows you to get this in. When you've finished your trim, make sure you sand it back, make it tidy, hoover out that sill area. You can then put the carpet back into place, and then you've got to start thinking about reassembling the car. Now, if you're going to take out the rear seat belts, this is the point where you do that before you put the door cards in. You've got 1 bolt at the top where the swivel is for the seat belt, and you've got another bolt lower down, essentially aligned with this rear tray, that is holding the reel in. So 2 bolts, both again at 17mm. Undo those, you can quickly whip out the seatbelt reels. Assembly is the reverse of obviously everything that went in. So as soon as you've got the carpet loop back in, you can then do the door card, and then you can move up to the B-pillar. On the B-pillar itself, 2 things you do not do. You do not fit back the swivel of the seatbelt yet. So you just leave that hanging loose over the top of the card, and you do not fit the coat hook at the top. Those 2 things you do once the cage is in. So they're the last things you do to reassemble before you put the front seats back in. In the front, just put your sun visors down so they're forward to the screen, and also with the mirror, just tilt it so that it is furthest towards the screen, and that gives you a bit more room to get the cage up. You may have to manipulate that as you're putting the cage in. So this is the point when you've got to try and thread the bar into the car. It's not that difficult, in fairness. Once you've trimmed that plastic, you've got everything back together, you've just got a pretty cavernous, empty space to get it in. You've got to thread it in like this, so it kind of goes in laying forward. You then get the two legs in the right place here. You push them back as far as you can into the carpet, and then it allows you then to rotate the cage up. You don't need to remove the rear view mirror, you just need to move that mirror so it's forward towards the front of the car. As long as you trim this plastic, it gives you the space to get it right into the back. It fits a car with a sunroof, as it's, you know, evident from my car. There's no issue. It will, the top of the bar, be skimming the fabric of the roof as you rotate it back into position. So be very careful, go slowly, gentle, just guide it in back, right to the back of the car. Once you've got the cage back in place, the first thing to do is to finger tight, get the bolts into the rear of the cage, and that gets you your general alignment sorted. Don't torque them up, don't do them really tight, just literally do them finger tight all the way down to where, you know, there's very light contact metal on metal, but you can, you know, literally get hold of the cage and rattle it around. That gives you a bit of fore and aft movement for when you're working on the front leg. Once you've got those, it's time to move to the front. That's where I use the studs, and I'll show you that now and how I use some ratchet straps to compress the cage and make the fitment align really nicely. The only other thing I need to do at the moment is just put my blanking caps over the bottom of that leg cover there. I've left it off for now just because I just want to double check and go back after a little bit of driving that nothing has worked loose, and then make sure they're torqued to 50 Newton meters. As I said before, if you're going to take the rear seat belts out, now's the time to get those rear seat belts removed. Otherwise, I mean, I did do it, I went back afterwards and removed the rear seat belts, but it's much more difficult when this cage is in place rather than doing it all at once when those door cards are removed. So looking straight down now on top of the stud. So essentially, once you've got the cage in place, you can then feed the stud through and find the hole. These won't line up perfectly to where the studs are, and I used the compression straps I have just to pull this bar into place once the rear was fixed in its anchor points, and that allowed me to get the stud perfectly through and aligned. Then you can just feed through the spacer over the top, then double nut the stud and tighten the stud down to where you need it. I then left the inside nut here. That means that if I ever need to release the seat belt, I'm not releasing the cage because I've got two fasteners. So that one's tightened down to 50 Newton meters, that one's tightened down on top of it, another 50 Newton meters, and I've got the possibility now to remove my belts without needing to remove the cage, which for me was a huge plus. Because of my bucket seats, the belt is going through the seat, so there's no way I can take those front seats out without releasing this belt. And for any interior jobs you might want to do in the future, you know, the last thing you want is having to keep releasing the cage every time you want to do it. So for me, this is a huge plus and makes the whole installation, let's call it 5,000 times easier. Taking out the rear seatbelt reels, I can tell you the weight saving, there you go, pretty useful. Another 1.5 kilos saved out of the car. The overall weight change in the car then, so just looked at those seat reels, they were 1.5 kilograms. The rear seat delete that I did previously was 12.9 kilograms, and the actual cage weighed in at 12.7 kilograms. So I've got an overall net saving now of 1.7 kilo to add to the other savings of the car. The other thing to note is I actually think the centre of gravity will be lower, despite having the bar over your head. Most of the weight of the cage and that crossover point is quite low, and the legs that go down to the floor. Now when you look at the rear seat, most of the weight in that rear seat delete was up quite high on the seat backs. The bottoms are just flimsy bit of foam, but the rears are really quite substantial to carry any load of a passenger in there and for any sort of absorb any crash impacts. You've also got the seat rails which sit up quite high. So yeah, I think that overall, you know, safety's improved, weight and the centre of gravity is improved, and hopefully you'll agree, it looks cool. Well, there's no doubt the view rearward is reduced, because with my spoiler with a bit of rake on it and then the roll bar just above it, yeah, rear visibility is not the best with the bar in, but it's a small price to pay. We've got wing mirrors for that. So essentially that is it. Cage in, seats back in, and she's ready to drive again. I hope you enjoyed the video. If there's anything I've not answered and you've got any questions, just drop a comment down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. Otherwise, thanks for watching and joining me on the journey. Cheers.